Welcome back. On April 10th, back in 1998, 15 years ago, the Good Friday Agreement, it was signed. Now, the landmark accord considered a huge political development in the Northern Ireland peace process, the development. Now, since then, tensions in the region have almost disappeared. So it was that considered practically unthinkable at the time and where we are today. Now, many draw parallels between what happened in the Northern Ireland peace process, something people thought they'd never see in their lifetimes, comparing that to today's Middle East peace process, which to many is just a pipe dream. Now, as we approach the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement and reflect on President Obama's recent trip to the Middle East, we're asking which lessons, if any, from Ireland can be applied today. And for more, we're very pleased to be joined by George Mitchell, former Senate Majority Leader and former Special Envoy for Middle East Peace, also the architect with others here in the Northern Ireland peace negotiations. Senator, thank you so much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You know, in the past, we've talked everything from politics to baseball, and I thought today we'd talk, given on the calendar, both peace and the prospects of it. And at the risk of going down memory lane with a little nostalgia here, I wanted to read a piece that many people may have seen in the Sunday Times this past weekend, remembering an Easter miracle in Northern Ireland. It was a great piece by Colin McCann. I want to read a portion of it and then get your reaction. He said in part, quote, "After 15 years, the Good Friday Peace Agreement in Northern Ireland still occasionally quivers, sometimes abruptly, and yet it holds. It's one of the great stories for the second half of the 20th century, and by the nature of its refusal to topple, it is one of the continuing marvels of the 21st as well. While rockets fizzle across the Israeli border and funeral chants sound along the streets of Aleppo in Syria, the drones cutting coordinates in the blue over Kandahar, Afghanistan, the Irish peace process reaffirms the possibility that, despite the weight of evidence against human nature, we are all still capable of small moments of resurrection, no matter where we happen to be." And I'm curious, Senator, are you more surprised that the agreement finally came to be, or that 15 years later it still held?
I'm not surprised because I spent 5 years in Northern Ireland, meeting, negotiating, listening to, sometimes disagreeing with political leaders of Northern Ireland, but becoming deeply acquainted with the people there, their history. They're a proud, energetic, strong, and opinionated people. But although I knew there would be many challenges, and I said at the time that the Good Friday Agreement was the best that could be done under the circumstances. It was a political compromise. It didn't answer every question or solve every problem. We specifically left others to be decided in the future. At the same time, by then I knew enough about the people of Northern Ireland and about their history to have a strongly held feeling that it would ultimately work out as it has. It is still imperfect. There are still problems, challenges. It still remains a segregated society. But on the whole, it's a society looking to the future, and I think it will be a prosperous and peaceful future as well.
Everything I've read is that it almost fell apart several times. I'm curious, why did it hold at the end? Was it that the people were so fatigued by the violence they were ready for it? There were a lot of attempts in the past that never came to be. Why did it work 15 years ago when it didn't before?
Well, that'll await the judgment of history. Sometimes when you're living in the middle of a hurricane, you can't really see what's going on. You're grappling with the immediate effects and survival. That's kind of how I felt when I was there for those 5 years. I can identify some factors, but I'm sure that there are many others that even I, who was in the middle of it, am not aware of. The first was the fact to which you referred, the weariness of the people with conflict, the fear and anxiety that hung over that society like a dark cloud that never left. Was a tremendous problem for people who really yearn for just the normal life that we take for granted here in our country. Secondly, was the political leadership of Northern Ireland. Now, it's fashionable these days in the United States and even in Northern Ireland and elsewhere to criticize politicians, make fun of them, insult them, demean them. But the fact is that the political leaders of Northern Ireland, ordinary men and women who'd spent their entire lives in conflict, rose to the occasion. And at a moment when their country most needed them, they put their careers, their lives, their families, their futures on the line to reach agreement, to solve problems not by bombs and bullets, but by peaceful democratic procedures. And I think that's who deserves the principal credit, the political leaders of Northern Ireland and the people of Northern Ireland. There are many other factors as well. Bill Clinton deserves a lot of credit, the first American president to make this a real issue for the United States. The prime ministers of Britain and Ireland, those at the time of the agreement, Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern, and those who preceded them, who moved the process forward and made it work. And so while it is still imperfect, there are still unanswered questions, challenges right now, ongoing controversy, and it remains a segregated society, I think and hope and pray that genuine reconciliation is on the way over the coming generations, and that it will be a peaceful and very prosperous place for great people. I'm an American, Richard, and very proud of it. I always will be. But a large part of my heart and my emotions will always be in Northern Ireland.
Why was it so important, and especially, I think it's apropos given we just had the Easter weekend behind us, to get the deal done by Good Friday, the Good Friday Agreement? It wasn't just a random date, I assume. Why was it so important to get it done by that deadline?
I chose that date. It was in mid-February of 1998 on a flight from Dublin back to New York to see my family for a brief visit that I realized that the process was spiraling downward. 2 days after Christmas in 1997, a prominent Protestant paramilitary leader had been murdered in prison by a group of Catholic prisoners. That touched off a retaliatory tit-for-tat series of killings. And by the time we got to London in January and Dublin in February, the process was spiraling downward. Violence was increasing, and I thought the only chance was if we set a firm, absolutely unbreakable deadline that the process had to end. That's the only chance to get an agreement. It didn't make an agreement certain, but it gave us a chance, because I felt that if we kept going as we were doomed to failure. And so I got all the parties to agree to it, to a firm, unbreakable deadline. The initial deadline was midnight, Thursday, April 9th. I knew enough about the parties that I'd have to build in a little cushion there. I really hoped to get it done by Easter Saturday. We got it done by about 5 o'clock on Good Friday. And that was the reason, because it was the only hope to get an agreement.
And you got to get Easter with your family back in the States, and you got to see your son, I understand, that was born in the interregnum. Now, this transitions obviously to the recent presidential trip by President Obama, obviously, to the Mideast, and it seems almost like a rite of passage. President feels they have to go there, but it's almost like the great white whale, peace between Palestinians and Israelis. It's just a pipe dream. I'm sure they said the same thing about trying to establish peace in Northern Ireland. You also know firsthand about Middle Eastern peace. Beyond the religion differences, I mean, interchange in sort of Catholics and Protestants, what you have for Jews and Muslims, and the geography, why is it more difficult, if that's a fair way to phrase it, to try and achieve peace in that part of the world than what we saw 15 years ago in Northern Ireland?
First, I think it can be achieved, and I believe it will, because I remain convinced that there's no such thing as a conflict that can't be ended. They're created and conducted by human beings. They can be ended by human beings. Secondly, the Middle East is more complicated, more difficult, older, if possible, than the conflict in Northern Ireland. I'll tell you a story. Richard, a few years ago, I was giving a lecture at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, invited there by the President of Israel. And in the question and answer period, I talked about Northern Ireland, and I remarked that it had been, the peace agreement in Northern Ireland came 800 years after the beginning of the British domination of Ireland. And after I finished, as I was walking out, I was surrounded by a crowd of people asking questions, wishing me well, wanting autographs, that sort of thing. And an elderly man came up, somewhat hard of hearing, and so he yelled pretty loud. He said, "Senator, did you say 800 years? I said, "Yes, 800 years. He repeated the number. I repeated the number. Then he said to me, he said, "No wonder you settled it. It's such a recent argument." In other words, in comparison to the Middle East, 800 years was recent. And it is more complicated and difficult, but let me tell you, it's going to be solved. I know there's a long history of failure, 10 presidents, 20 secretaries of state, many Israeli prime ministers, innumerable envoys like me haven't been able to get it done. But I think it will be done, and I think it will be done because ultimately the people of Israel and the Palestinians will recognize that it is in their self-interest to get it done. It will be politically difficult, but it'll be politically difficult to get an agreement, but the difficulty will be much greater and the consequences much more severe on both sides if they don't get together.